Hi, I'm Michael Hughes, and this is Contract Mastery. In this video, we're going to take a look at paragraphs 7 dealing with returned payments and paragraph 8 having to do with application of funds. So let's start off talking about returned payments. And here, usually we're talking about checks being returned for non-sufficient funds, or perhaps electronic payments being rejected for non-sufficient funds. It's also pretty common to see payments rejected because they're drawn on a closed account, things like that. But for whatever reason, the tenant presents a payment, but it is not honored by their financial institution. And the lease talks about what happens between landlord and tenant when that situation arises. So on a return payment, the tenant will pay the landlord some agreed amount of money for each payment that the tenant tenders to the landlord, which is returned or not honored for any reason by the institution on which it is drawn. That return payment fee is in addition to any late charges that accrue as a result of the returned payment. So let's say that the tenant gives a rent payment for whatever reason. That check is rejected by their bank, and it gets returned, and now we're past our grace period for when the rent has to be paid. Remember, payment of rent, it has to end up in the landlord's hand by the rent payment deadline. That's a time is of the essence date. So in many cases with return payments, you're not only going to get the return payment charge accruing, but you're also going to get late charges because it's past the rent payment deadline and the landlord does not have the rent. Also in paragraph 7, it says that the tenant must make any returned payment good by paying such amounts plus any associated charges in certified funds. So with respect to every return payment, it's not enough for the tenant to just write another personal check. Now the lease requires that the tenant has to show up with a cashier's check or some other type of certified funds from a financial institution. Paragraph 8 deals with the application of funds. And what we're talking about here is, okay, the landlord receives a payment from the tenant, but the tenant has a few different charges outstanding. Let's say that there is a return payment fee, there's some late charges, and then there's the rent that's due. How does the landlord credit the payment that they receive in the face of all of these outstanding charges? So what the lease tells us is, regardless of any notation that is made on a payment, the landlord may apply funds received from the tenant first to any non-rent obligations of the tenant, and then to any outstanding rent. The landlord is empowered to pay or credit other charges before applying any funds to the tenant's rent obligation. And those other charges can be things such as late charges, return payment charges, repairs, brokerage fees, periodic utilities, animal charges, all kinds of things that are authorized to be charged under the lease agreement. So any of those other non-rent obligations can be credited first, and then anything left over gets credited to the rent. This sets up a no-win situation for the tenant. Once late charges and other types of charges start to accrue, they are going to continue to build until that entire outstanding amount is paid in full. And if it's not, if the tenant is not making efforts more than just paying the rent, if they're trying to ignore all of these fees, what most tenants don't understand is that The more they ignore the fees, the more they build. And then any payments that they are making, thinking that they're paying rent, are actually just going to pay the late fees, and nothing is touching their rent amount. And so there's more late fees, and it just keeps building and building. So it's important for tenants to understand that it's really, really critical to avoid walking down that road, starting with late fees. And if something happens and for some reason you do incur a late fee, get it paid. Get it paid quick and be done with it. Don't let it sit there and fester and build, because it will only continue to build. And so that's some great advice that we as license holders can share with our tenants.